don't focus on the memorization of these like keywords and stuff, because if you know the process, you could be at any company, you could have any kind of job, you could get any kind of contract or get any kind of client or build anything you want for yourself. And all you have to do is every time you get to the point you're like, okay, I know logically in my brain how I'm supposed to write maybe this logic of this algorithm, or how I would pass this information around here, but I don't know the name of like the function that I have to call from the standard library. I don't know like the keyword for writing a variable and this or that. You just Google, boom.
All right, I am here with Josh from Developer Direction. You know, some of you guys may recognize him. We've had him on the channel a few times, but yeah, it's been a while. How you doing, Josh?
I'm good, dude. I haven't spoken to you in like 12 hours.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're always talking behind the scenes and stuff. But yeah, what cool stuff have you been up to recently? Do you even do you have time to code much nowadays? I know you're doing a lot.
Dude, it's so no. The long answer is, or the short answer is no, but the long answer is like I'm still doing some when I can. Actually, after this tonight, I'm gonna get on with Aurelian. I'm gonna get on with him and finish up that NFT marketplace project for that client, because we're like this close from being finished with it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, what do you see like the state of software development being at in 2022?
Man, I only see like a bunch of growth, which is like, it's hard to say anything else other than that, just because everything in the last 20, 30 years has been integrated with IT. So everything that anybody does with a computer, which is everybody at every job, right? Including you and me right now using the Zoom, it all runs off of software. And until we get to a point to where people stop using computers for work, which I don't know what that would require, like an EMP or something like that. There's really not really been a downward trend for I guess you could say for both of our fields, right? Just for IT in general. It's not something that's, I mean, if you look at real estate, right, and maybe you're like what do they call them, developers, not our kind of developers, but like real estate developers, they go through times where there's nothing to build, there's no one that needs any homes built, right? And then there's other times where it's like, they can't even hire enough people on their crew to get as many homes built as they need. But so it's completely different. But I see nothing but good from here on out, at least this year too, even with all the crazy stuff going on in the economy.
Yeah. So what are some of like the trends that you're seeing with programming? I know, like, speaking from like the cybersecurity side, I know everyone's talking about smart contracts and Web3 and stuff now. It's kind of funny because we were talking about it for a long time and like no one wanted to even have a discussion about it. Now seems like everyone's trying to learn that stuff.
Yeah, of course, right? Definitely Web3, definitely anything and everything that has to do with being involved in the blockchain industry. I mean, that's like Web3 is the hottest new thing right now. Everybody wants to get in it. Everybody wants to learn it. And the people that don't want to learn how to develop for it, they want to do things like buy NFTs and cryptocurrency and stuff like that. And I had just been to the Bitcoin conference 2022, and I think I told you
3 years ago. I was there, 2019.
Okay, so three years ago, how many people do you think, would you say were there?
Oh man, the conference was not that big. I'll say that there was a decent number of people there, but I'm sure it's way bigger now. I mean, that was after, apparently, like, one of my friends is like pretty OG, and he like went there. He said like the biggest growth that he saw was between 2016 and 2017, because you had the big ICO boom and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, still, it was like a small conference building. I'm not really sure in terms of numbers what I would estimate.
Was it in Miami back then?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. So it was probably in the same building. So this year they had 22,000 people there. It was pretty crowded. I didn't expect to see that many people there. And dude, the craziest part was, as compared to last year, there was a bunch of people that were just like, Bitcoiners or crypto people. There wasn't a lot of like suits there, if you know what I mean. And it's funny because they had people, they actually call them the suits. I was wearing a suit for the first day for the networking day, but I'm not one of those guys. Okay. All right, guys, I'm not a suit, or, if you need me to be, I will. But in all seriousness, though, there was a lot of like normal people there that were just in all kinds of different industries, and they were there to just really just network, which was crazy. 22,000 people in a tiny little conference center just because of, you know, Bitcoin. That it's still alive and well, even though, you know, whole economic recession narrative going on.
Yeah. I remember I even got some pretty cool Bitcoin socks there.
Did you really?
Then, but I'm pretty sad now. I think I got a hole in it, so can't wear them anymore.
I got this shirt, and it's like you know, the don't step on snake flag, the don't tread on me flag.
Yeah.
I got this shirt, and it's basically like the same exact flag, but it's got a Bitcoin like around the snake, and it says "Don't trade on me." So I thought that was cool.
Yeah,
they were handing them out.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you as well. I mean, obviously with tech, right, with programming, with cybersecurity as well, you always have new trends coming out constantly, right? And there's always the new hot thing, and it can be very tempting to like want to, you know, explore everything, but that could be like a really, you know, big obstacle in your way when you're trying to stay focused on learning something. So what would be the advice that, you know, you give to people, you know, maybe your students or something like that, that you kind of struggle with, like trying to chase the shiny objects a little too much when learning this stuff?
One thing I would say to them is, if you still don't have like your fundamentals solid and down pat, then maybe wait a little bit before you go and venture off into like all this cool flashy stuff. And the reason why is not because like, oh, that new stuff, that's just for you Zoomers out there. Like it's because if you don't have a solid understanding of the fundamentals and everything that you should prior to doing something more advanced or complex or something that's going to be maybe different, it can disrupt the way that your thinking process is. And if you don't have all the foundation already, then you might actually be skipping steps, and that actually might actually end up confusing you. And the thing that I hate the most seeing, man, is when people skip that foundation part.
Like they just jump right into React, don't learn JavaScript.
Yeah. And dude, and when they do that too, they end up getting like even more confused. And then they tell themselves like, oh, this stuff isn't for me.
Yeah. They don't know what what's the JS code, what's the React code. They don't know.
Yeah. And then they think that it's because they're not smart enough to do it, or that it's just not for them. But it's because like, no, dude, it's because you, instead of getting in your whatever car it is that they when you go to the DMV to take your first driving test, like a Ford Mercury, right? Basically a harmless car that you could just run into anything and be okay. You're trying to get into like a Lamborghini, and you don't even know how to drive a manual. So like you're just going to run into a wall, and you're going to tell yourself, well, maybe driving cars, that's just a scary thing. No, it's just because you're just trying to skip steps. That's why.
Yeah. Or like trying to ride a motorcycle, learn how to ride a motorcycle. You jump on like a 600 horsepower.
Yeah. Instead of starting at 250.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, I definitely agree. And the way that I see this coming up as well in my field is that sometimes people, they don't learn the fundamentals of the technology. They just try to jump straight into hacking it, and they just find a tool somewhere on the internet, use the tool, but they don't understand what the tool is doing. And, you know, maybe they get lucky and they're able to hack it or whatever. But eventually, once you get to interviews and stuff like that, any good interviewer is going to ask you, you know, they're going to dig in to see, do you understand like what the tool is doing? Do you understand like what the vulnerability is and things like that? And I'm saying this like as someone on the other side, because I, like I said, I can see I can see the people that interview now, because I'm on the other side of all of that. And that's a question that I see a lot of candidates get wrong a lot of times is, you know, they ask them and they have no idea. So yeah, definitely there's like a lot of stuff that you need to know. I know like we always preach hands on keyboard, and I very much believe in that, but you do have to have a certain amount of the fundamental knowledge as well, the theoretical knowledge as well, certainly on interviews, especially as well. And that's why I have the top 10 interview questions that I came out with recently. You guys can get down in the description below for free. It should help you out with, you know, learning all the common questions you might encounter on an interview. But yeah, I was also going to ask you as well. I was watching this interview recently with this very prominent pen tester in the field. And one one statement he made I thought was really interesting. He said that he felt that coding, or at least basic scripting, let's say, should be a requirement for all people, pretty much regardless of your job. What is your take on that?
Dude, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, 100%. Now I would say because of things that like, and I'm not saying everyone's going to be going and using something like this, because of things like GitHub Copilot, just really like that whole no code movement. I think that might not be as much of a necessity as it maybe used to have been. But I do think that if you don't at least know like some basic scripting languages, or at least like the basics of programming in general, just to do a scripting language, then if you are trying to go into any kind of other IT field, especially IT, but you're going to be missing out, and you're leaving yourself open to being able to have issues in many places, right? Like even if you're an accountant and you need to use something as basic as like Microsoft Excel, there's macros that you use in there, and it's essentially like writing regex in code. Like it's basically just like that. And even doing things just like that, it can help you out a lot down the line, especially if you're in IT, right? And even more so too, if you're just in a corporate environment, or if you're in the corporate world. Like something that you have to do no matter what job it is. If you're in a corporate world, you're going to be involved with a computer, right? And I'm a firm believer that your efficiency and your speed at a lot of the stuff that you do that involves computer, if you just know the basics of programming, it can help you out, and it can make you look and shine a lot more than other people working around you.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And another thing that I was gonna ask you about is, I know a lot of people in my space, and probably in yours as well. They want to learn programming, or they want to learn pen testing. And one of the things they hear a lot about in my field is that, the best pen testers understand code as well. They can write code, create scripts and stuff like that. And that's something that a lot of newcomers are really intimidated by, the fact that they have to, learn to code and stuff like that. And I'm sure a lot of beginners, even delving into programming, obviously they know they're going to need to code, but I think a lot of people get intimidated by that, and they can have a tendency to spend too much time on like books and videos rather than actually practicing coding. So what is normally your approach to help that kind of person that's stuck with that?
Literally just start with the basics, man. I have like, because you sat in some of my courses, and usually when I give that, like the 5 basic fundamentals of programming, that objects, classes, variables, data types, functions. Like if you can understand at least what those 4 things are, or rather 5, you consider objects and classes separate ones, you can start with almost any language. But a more solid answer for that is, dude, just literally pick up one language, like Python. Honestly, Python would probably be one of the most perfect things to start with, or JavaScript, and go through something like W3 Schools and at least get through the introductory guide. Once you do that, it's going to be a little bit less intimidating. In fact, it should probably be a lot less intimidating, because especially if you do something like Python, you'll find out how pleasantly easy it actually is to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that both like aspiring developers and pen testers as well, a lot of times we have a tendency to fixate too much on the end result, right? Like we see, people see like this shadowy super coder, right? They see like the sweaty basement hacker, right? And they see them just effortlessly doing the thing, right? And they look at their own skill and their own ability and say like, wow, I'm so far away from this. And then they wake up the next day and they just feel terrible. They're like, oh, like I can never be like this person over here.
Yep.
And when you think that way constantly, it makes it so much more difficult to actually sit down, like you said, and just do the steps, do the basics, do the things that you need to learn in order to eventually get to that point. I think that like everyone could benefit from just enjoying the process a little bit more, and focusing less on the end results and more on the actions That's something that I'm really trying to drive home with a lot of the clients that I'm working with right now, because they're running into that issue as well, where they have this goal of like, I want to get employed by an X number of months, and they're looking at their current skill and they're like, I'm so far away from that. And, I think it really comes back to just, focusing on the actions and just repeating that process until eventually you will get as a byproduct of that, you will get the skill set.
Yeah, of course. And there's a term for that too, right? Imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, you've seen lots of guys in my group deal with that too. And I agree. Focusing on the actions, like, okay, right now you might not be able to be like this ominous, shadowy supercoder that you would ideally like to be, right? But just because you can't do that right now and you're a beginner doesn't mean that same person that's doing those things didn't start out that way either, right? Not everybody is just born and they come out of their mother and then they're hacking 100 ETH from some kind of contract with zero reading or zero knowledge of anything, right? Like, these people definitely spent time in the trenches. They were reading stuff. They probably spent a lot of time trying to like breach contracts and do whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a shadowy supercoder who steals ETH from contracts, right? But instead of thinking in that negative way, which, by the way, that's what's going to make you feel like this imposter syndrome, like you're some kind of imposter. If you do just focus on the actions, like you were just talking about, every time you do something new and you pull it off and it was successful to you and you understand it, you can go and like literally check that off on a piece of paper if you have to, or make a text file on your computer, whatever. Come back 1, 2, 3, 4 months later, you look back at all these things that you learned and you're like, okay,
yeah,
I did that. Even if you don't remember how to do them, you know that you did it. And so that the mentality that you had when you were going about problem solving and troubleshooting it, you're like, okay, I did that once. I can definitely do that again.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And so, yeah, then the next thing that I was gonna ask you, with that being said, then, if someone is trying to learn programming, right, and they're aspiring, to be a pen tester, so obviously they wouldn't need to know as much about programming as someone taking your course trying to become a software developer. How, you've talked a bit about the timelines in your course for, your students on becoming a software developer, but what would you estimate, like if someone just wanted to, they're completely new and they wanted to learn programming in order to, automate some tasks, or, maybe maybe they work in IT or something like that, and they just want to learn some scripting to be able to automate stuff and have some useful scripts they would actually use. About how long would you estimate that would take someone?
Oh, you could do that in 4 weeks, man. 100%. Because I got guys come in, take one course, the 4 weeks later, it's over. They know the fundamentals. They're not ready to go apply for a job, although surprisingly so, some of them actually are and have done so, right? But majority is not going to be like that. But they know the fundamentals, and then when they go and try to go do something else, it's like, hey, that was all kind of the same. This programming thing, it's all actually a lot less complicated than I thought it to be. So yeah, 4 weeks, especially if you're actually trying and you're focusing and paying attention.
Yeah. And along those lines, right, it's like I see so many people in my own courses as well that like I said, I heard you say this, I believe, the other day, where it's probably fear is what it is, but you see people that they spend so much time watching and reading and then rewatching and rereading, where they would be way better served if they actually just put their hands on the keyboard and tried. And I honestly think that, that there's a bit of struggling that is necessary in order to acquire these skill sets, right? I mean, you have to have that experience of being stuck and trying to work your way through it. It's not always going to be like a YouTube video that someone pre-planned, right? Where they're writing the code and it's all, they hit enter and it worked the first time, no errors, no nothing, right? That's not the reality of code. That's not the reality of hacking either. So yeah, I think that a lot of people, it's probably fear, but what do you normally do to kind of motivate those people? What would you say to someone that's, in that situation?
Well, the first thing I would say is, if you can't actually like force yourself to do something, then you're not going to be able to even get to the point to where you can actually enjoy it. Because a lot of people, maybe they don't realize, and some people just automatically enjoy coding and tinkering with a computer, but a lot of people don't realize that when you actually get to the point where you're good at it, not only do you like doing it, you actually love it, and you'd rather just do that instead of like going out on a Friday or Saturday night. But so here's something interesting that people can think about. So going to the gym and like lifting weights, stuffing your face with like food if you're trying to like gain muscle, and trying to like focus on getting sleep 8 hours every single night, drinking all this water, right? Basically being a bodybuilder. Most people that do that kind of thing or thinking about doing something like that, they're like, ugh, that's like, no, thank you, right? It's not pleasurable. They don't like it. Now, why do bodybuilders end up doing what they do, even from the start when they weren't good at it? Because to them, it was something that was kind of challenging, and that they decided they're going to go and make it this kind of like fun, adventurous thing and get some kind of enjoyment out of it. And eventually, those people become pros. They go off to do good things. It's the same thing as like the shadowy supercoder that, if you're someone who does feel like you have this imposter syndrome, and you go and you're looking, you're like, all these other people that can do it way better than me. And it was easy to them. It was easy to them. Yeah, it might have actually been easy to them, but that doesn't mean that they're smarter than you. The reason it was easy to them is because they made it this fun, adventurous thing. They didn't allow it to be intimidating to them. They had just a completely different mindset. And so that way when they're doing this stuff and they're learning from the beginning, it's not like this kind of frustrating battle that they have. They're just having enjoyment out of it, which makes it easier for them. And it would be the same for you if you could just shift your thinking and just try to make it this fun, accepting, challenging thing. And if you just force yourself to do it a little bit, once you kind of get over what we call tutorial hell, you're kind of in like this brand new place, and you kind of feel like you're empowered, and you're like, I just want to build this stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the tutorial hell. I was actually going to ask you a bit about that, because so I hear a lot of people say things about like their plan with learning programming languages and stuff like that. And I've definitely heard a lot of comments, before we get to the tutorial hell thing, I have heard a lot of comments as well saying things like, their plan, to learn 5 programming languages is they're going to spend 1 week on each programming language and rotate. And I'm like, I always tell them that's a terrible idea, because what's going to happen is you're only going to touch the very surface level of all those languages. So you're going to learn like the same things in all those languages. So all you're going to get to cover really is like variables and like maybe syntax, like typecasting, or like something a little bit beyond that, but you're not really going to learn too much. How much would you say, with that being said, how much would you say it helps to learn one programming language when it comes to learning, your second or your third?
The first language is the most important part, and it's not because it's this language or that language. In all honesty, even if you were to start out with like just C or C++, it doesn't really matter, because people always have, and I know you've heard this question before too, like, hey, what language is the best language? What language should I learn to code with? You want to learn how to code. You don't want to learn languages. And people's thinking is a little bit off on that, because at the end of the day, what is the end result that you want to do when you're programming something for a computer? You want to make the computer do a certain thing, right? And so if people can also shift their thinking in this area and think, okay, how can I make this computer do this thing that I wanted to do? Instead of like, how can I make this computer do something in this language or that language? At the end of the day, most of the languages they're fundamentally the same, right? So they're missing out on actually learning to code instead of actually, they're missing out on learning to code when they're trying to learn some kind of like language, and they're focusing on the language itself. They're missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, because the language itself is like the least important thing, it's
Hmm.
understanding the concepts and what the language is what the languages are capable of, really. And when it comes down to it, it's usually the same functionality you can do in like any programming language, right? I mean,
Yep.
obviously there's nuances and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
once you learn your first language, the second or third one mostly comes down to learning like the different syntax and different, smaller things pretty
Hmm.
much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I always tell my guys, like, look, quit worrying about like memorizing all this stuff from this library and this language. Just learn to code, and if you learn to code, you can say that you know all languages. Like,
Yeah.
a good engineer, a true engineer, doesn't have this like this fear of if a client gave them a project, or if they're someone that they're working for a company and gave them a project and it's in some kind of language that they've never used before. A real engineer wouldn't be afraid about that. He's like, I know how to code. Like, there's Google, there's the internet.
Yeah.
So if I don't know the certain function name that I need to call from the standard library because it's named different than this other language, then I could go to Google and find it.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a really good point. Let's just dispel a few more myths while we're at it here. I feel like one thing that I hear in your community, my community, just in the internet in general, a lot of people have this notion that once they become a super coder or once they become a super hacker, that suddenly they're not going to need to use Google anymore, or not having to use Google makes them better somehow because they memorize the code or they memorize the commands if they're trying to hack something. How important is it to memorize code in your opinion?
I don't know. I'd rather leave that space in my brain for creativity, for building things, as opposed to memorizing things that used to be in a library somewhere but are now on Google. Right? It's not that important, man.
Yeah.
Obviously, over time, the more you deal with stuff, you're just going to automatically commit things to memory, right? And that's just going to come with time. So I would say let that come with time, and don't focus on the memorization of these like keywords and stuff, because if you know the process, you could be at any company, you could have any kind of job, you could get any kind of contract or get any kind of client or build anything you want for yourself. And all you have to do is every time you get to the point that you're like, okay, I know logically in my brain how I'm supposed to write maybe this logic of this algorithm, or how I would pass this information around here, but I don't know the name of like the function that I have to call from the standard library. I don't know like the keyword for writing a variable and this or that. You just Google, boom. It's called being efficient, and you actually can be you would be a better developer and a hacker if you just had those thought processes committed to memory, and then the other stuff, allow Google to take care of that when you need to.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people think that they need to memorize lines of code in order to feel like they know it. Like I basically hear that notion a lot of like, oh, if I can't write this from a blinking cursor, then I don't understand it. And it's like, no, that's not the case. If you can step through code line by line and you understand what it's doing, then you understand the code. You don't have to commit it to memory.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's like with like the English language, man. Like, what do you think if you were a person who gave speeches, right? And you're paid to give speeches by the quality of your speeches. And let's just say you studied all these people throughout history who gave speeches, and you need to come up in front of the White House to give a speech. Like, what makes that person a better speaker? Memorizing and saying exactly the speech that someone else said in the past, or taking that same message and using their own creativity and their own vocabulary and being expressive in their own way to do it themselves, because they might actually end up doing it better.
But Josh, what is the best language for public speaking, right? What language should I learn?
Exactly. The same thing could go for that too. I was going to ask you one of the first questions you asked me about, I guess, particularly this year with IT industry, because like we're kind of like in like some kind of like areas of like certain economic uncertainty. It's certainly uncertain, I guess, with all the craziness going on and the oil prices and the sanctions and stuff. I don't see that as being negative for our industry at all. In fact, I think our industry has been kind of like bulletproof and recession proof throughout history so far, time proven. But would you agree or disagree with that? And if you did disagree, which you probably don't, but if you did, I would want to know why.
Oh yeah, I mean, like my field, I was having this discussion with my manager earlier this week. He moved down to Austin, so I met up with him, but he was just telling me about all the companies that he's worked for as a pen tester. 'Cause he used to be a pen tester a few years back, and then he went to management. But he was naming some really big companies, and he was telling me like his experience at them and how like they were so in their infancy with their security team, like and that was my experience as well. Obviously I haven't worked at as many places as him, but I have worked for multiple Fortune 500 companies, US government, all of that. And from the outside, everyone would think like, oh, like that's a huge company, I'm sure they have their security team sorted out, they probably have solid security in place. And then you go there, you get hired on there, and they're like, oh yeah, we just built our security team 2 years ago. And like everything is like super, it's really like the wild frontier as far as cybersecurity goes. And all these companies, like even the largest companies. So like, what do you think is going on at the small companies, the startups,
Yeah.
all of that stuff, they don't even have a security team. They're usually like outsourcing and stuff like that. But yeah, it's very much at its infancy, and there's such a high demand, but very few people to fill, qualified people to fill the spots. I mean, the current job that, I have right now, they've been looking forever to hire a second person from the US to fill the role. They've been looking for several months before I joined, and I joined in November. And they're like, even the second week into the job, they didn't really know too much about me other than the interview process and all of that. And they're like, hey, is there anyone that might be qualified, that you could refer to us
Yeah.
to fill this position? Because they can't. And I looked at, they've interviewed over like 40 people for the position, and like they haven't found anyone. So there's an extreme demand in this stuff. And I mean, one thing we saw already, right, through 2020, what happened, right? More companies started doing the work from home, work remote, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the cloud has become bigger as well. Technology, there's even more, it's even more technologically based, you could say, right? I mean, less people are coming into the office, more technology is being involved in just keeping a company going pretty much. So obviously when you have that, you have to have people that can manage that technology and security test it and develop it, right? So I only see this stuff on the rise, going forward.
Yeah, and with all the craziness and the scare over like the Russian hackers recently too, right? I mean, our IT infrastructure is garbage, and it needs to be rebuilt massively, especially in the US, and it needs to be secure. And until we get to that point, then by then maybe 100 years from now, we'll have to worry about the industry dying down. But
nah, you know why? You know why? Even still, no, for security at least, I will say, is because you could have the most secure technology possible.
Still gonna get broken.
It could be crystal, like everything could be like perfect security, every best practice, everything. But then the people are exploitable. You get someone to click
social engineering.
Social engineering. Get them to click on something, boom, you get in.
Hey, you know Kevin Mitnick is?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever read his first book?
Which one is it?
Actually, let me Google that real quick. I think it's I thought that it was his only book, but I believe he wrote other ones after that. Let me see. Kevin Mitnick.
Yeah, he's a big guy in the industry.
It's basically The Art of Deception by Kevin Mitnick.
Oh, that was recommended to me, but I have not read it.
Oh, dude, that's such a good book, man. It's such a good book because he explains, and he was one of the world's most famous hackers, right? In fact, he was so infamous that when he was in jail, they wouldn't even allow him to have a phone call because they were like, he's gonna set off a nuke by talking into the phone. And the reality was, he just knew like basic computer science. He actually really wasn't that good of a programmer. 90% of the stuff he did was through social engineering. And when he I think he coined that term, social engineering.
Yeah, I think so.
I was really big into him in college, and I was reading a lot of his books, and he's a really smart man. And point proven. Yeah, as long as people are people and people are vulnerable, nothing's going to be 100% secure.
I get surprised sometimes about things that I see. Like when I went and I bought my my car back last December. I was just signing the papers, and I'm sitting there in the dealership, and there's just a lady at the computer, printing off some papers or whatever. She turns around to print the papers, and literally the back of the computer, the back of the desktop is just facing me with all the ports there. If I just had like a virus on a USB, all I'd have to do is just boop, just plug it in there, and I can get access to that machine. And that's a lot of people would think, well, oh, that's just like a small workstation that that's not a big deal. It doesn't have access to that much or blah, blah, blah. But that's how a lot of these big hacks happen. Actually, they take over some kind of point of sale system,
Yep.
and then they just keep pivoting from there. That's pretty much what a red teamer does. That's the kind of stuff that I get to do now a lot. Now that I'm doing red teaming, is a lot of social engineering and stuff like that, trying to move and escalate my privileges across like a organization, move laterally. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. Basically simulating a Russian hacking group or a Chinese hacking group or whatever. Yeah,
that sounds pretty fun.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting actually. But yeah, did you have any last thing you wanted to say?
Learn to code, learn to change your own tire. If you're into crypto, self-custody your own crypto, that's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on the channel, Josh. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.
For sure.